Hey, what's up YouTube? Welcome to today's tutorial on the basics of modeling in 3ds Max 2016. In this tutorial we will be going over modeling a Pokeball, lighting it, adding materials, and rendering it. So let's get started. I made another video a few weeks ago on the basics of navigating 3ds Max's interface, so I would recommend watching that before watching this one. However, I will be going over what I'm doing as I'm doing it. It'll just be faster. So if you get confused, I recommend going back and watching that video. So first things first, let's maximize the perspective viewport by hitting Alt-W. This will give us a bigger view of what we are doing. Make sure we are in the Create tab, and we're going to add a sphere. So under the Standard Primitives box, we are going to click the Sphere item, and click in the center of our scene, and drag out our sphere. Now this sphere won't be centered by default, so we're going to hit W to go to the Transform tool, and in the bottom, we're going to change the X, Y, and Z values all to 0. This will perfectly center our object in our scene. And then I'm going to use the scroll wheel to zoom in a little bit. Now, if I hit F4, you'll see that it brings up a wireframe of the amount of faces we have. We need a few more faces than that to do what we want to do. So go over to the Modify tab, and we will change some of the properties of our sphere. First things first, I'm going to change the radius to an even 10. That'll make it things easier later on. And then I'm going to change these segments to 48 and hit enter. And that'll give us a few more polygons to work with. Right now this is a sphere. 3ds Max knows it as a sphere, which means it is calculating all these based on mathematics. What we want to do is we want to work on this as a mesh. So if I right click and hit convert to editable poly and click that, what it has done is it's converted from what 3ds Max knows as a sphere into a bunch of points and faces. 3ds Max does not know this is a sphere once we do this. All it knows is it's a bunch of points that somewhat resemble a shape. But what that allows us to do is that allows us to edit the individual points and faces into a shape we want. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the center of this Pokeball. So I'm going to hit Alt-W, go into our top view, middle click, and hit Alt-W again to maximize that. And then I'm going to use the scroll wheel to zoom in. Now, to make things a little easier to see, I'm going to hit F3 to go into the realistic view and F4 to bring up the wireframe view. And then I'm going to go over and click Polygon Select and click and drag out and select the center faces and then hit Delete, and that'll remove those. Now, the next step is to add the hole in the middle. Now, there are two ways we could do this. One, which is the bad way, so I don't recommend doing it this way, is if we selected these faces just like this, deleted them, and then used the vertex select to start dragging out these points like so. But as you can see, that's going to be very uneven, that's going to be very ugly, and I would not recommend doing it this way. So I'm going to undo all that, and what we're going to do is we are going to use a Boolean operator. The way this works is a Boolean operator allows you to take the shape of another three-dimensional object and use it to cut a hole into another object. So if I hit Alt-W to give us our 4 views again, go back to the Create tab, and under Standard Primitives, add a cylinder. Now I'm going to click and drag this out in the center of our view, about the size we want the hole, let go and drag up, just until it pokes out of the center of our sphere, and then I'm going to click again. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this cylinder to cut a hole into our Pokeball. As before, this cylinder is not centered, so I'm going to hit W and set the X, Y, and Z to 0. Hit enter. And then I'm going to go over to the Modify tab, and I'm going to set the height, I'm going to set the height segments to 1 because we don't need 5 height segments. And then I'm going to set the amount of sides to 50. This will just give us a little bit rounder of a hole to work with. And then I'm going to go back to the Create tab. And with our main shell selected, I'm going to click on it, change Standard Primitives to Compound Objects, and click Boolean. And then I'm going to click this button called Pick Operand B. This allows us to pick the object we want to use for cutting. So I'm going to click that and then select our cylinder. And as you can see, it cuts out a perfect hole right from the center. But now in doing this, it has transformed our editable mesh into a Boolean object. So we want to right click on our cylinder and hit convert to editable poly. And we want to do this again, like I said, because it has converted it away from an editable poly. So if I hit Alt W to maximize this viewport, you can see that our sphere currently is two-dimensional. It has no depth to it. So I'm going to add a modifier. The way this works is a modifier is a way to non-destructively edit your mesh. Meaning, if I add a modifier on top of it, I can change things, I can bend it around, I can do all these cool effects to it, and then I can still go back and edit the original mesh. So you'll see what I mean. So if I go to modifier list and click on the drop down, I'm going to scroll down until I find the shell modifier. And that is going to add some depth to it. But we don't want it coming out, we want it coming in. So I'm going to set the outer amount to 0, and I'm going to drag these arrows next to the inner amount up just a bit to about 0.76, something around there. Now, if I hit F4 to get rid of these lines and zoom in here, you'll see it looks kind of ugly. That's just some artifacts from the shell modifier. That'll happen. There are ways to fix this, but mainly it's because we used a Boolean first. So if I hit F4, you can sort of see how these lines are intersecting weird. Again, don't worry about that. We're not going to worry about that for this tutorial. So if we go back to the Create tab, what we want to do is we want to add the inner sphere, the inner black sphere. So I'm going to go back to Standard Primitives. I'm going to click on Sphere, and I'm going to drag out another sphere to about this big. I'm going to hit W, and I'm going to center it. Same as we did before by setting these values to 0. And as you can see, there's still a little bit of space, so I'm going to go over to the Modify tab and up the radius until it just intersects the inner bit. Just like that. And now the last part we need to model is the button that goes in the center. So hit Alt W to go back to the top viewport and add a cylinder. So drag it out and then just drag up a little bit, just like that. And if we go back to our perspective view, with our cylinder selected, if we hit Z, it'll center around our cylinder. So if we go back to the Modify tab, right click, convert to editable poly, what we can do is we can use the polygon select to select the front face, and we can go down to the inset menu, which is this little box next to the inset tool, and that'll pop up some menus and some controls on how to inset that face. So we're going to adjust it to our desired inset amount. So something about that. And then we're going to click this little checkbox right here, and that'll apply the inset. And then with that front face still selected, we are going to go down to the extrude settings, and we are going to lower this until it looks like the button we want. And then again, click the checkbox. And if we go back to the Create tab, you can see that we now have our object that's modeled how we want to. So in order to place this, I'm going to drag it forward on the Y value, just in front of our sphere, and then I'm going to set the X and the Z to 0. And that's going to place it right in front. And if I hit Z again to center it, I can just drag it back on the Y axis until it's sticking out about there. And there we go. If I hit Control A and Z, that'll center it on everything we have selected. And you can see we have successfully modeled our Pokeball. Now, the next step is to add the materials. So I'm going to go up here. Well, actually, first off, we need to set up the renderer. So go up to Rendering, hit Render Setup, and change the renderer from default scanline renderer to NVIDIA Mental Ray. Now, if you're not familiar with rendering, don't worry about what I just did. It's just something you have to do. Click Exit Out. And next, we're going to create the materials. So go up here to the Material Editor and click on it. And that'll open up the Slate Material Editor. Now, this is a little different from programs like Cinema 4D, where you have menus and stuff like that. And it's even older from 3ds Max's old Material Editor, which, if you want 3ds Max's old Material Editor, you can go up here, hold down your mouse button, and then go down to the first option, and that'll open up the old Material Editor. But we don't want that right now because this is a lot better. So I'm going to maximize the viewport so we can see it easier. And if we go down under Mental Ray, Arch and Design, I'm going to drag out 3 of these materials onto our workspace. Just like this. Now each of these nodes is a separate material that we can link together and add textures and things like that. If you're familiar with node-based editing, this should come very easy. I'm not going to get too in-depth in this. That'll be for another video, but I'll just go over the basics of what we need to do in order to achieve our results. So in order to bring up the settings for a material, double-click on the node, and that'll bring up the settings for that node. So the first one is going to be our red material. So I'm going to go over here to the right, and under diffuse, I'm going to change the color to a bright red, and hit OK. And we have changed the diffuse color to red. And then I'm going to scroll down, and under BRDF, I'm going to click this box called by IOR. That'll give us IOR reflections, or Fresnel reflections, sorry, which is when the edges of the object that are angled away from you are more reflective. This is more similar to how it behaves in real life. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the next two materials. So I'm going to double click on the second one, change the color to white, and then change the Fresnel reflections to IOR. And then same thing for the third one, except I'm going to change it to black, and then again check by IOR. And now we have our three materials. If I minimize this window, and I'm using the middle mouse to pan around in this viewport, there are two ways we can apply our materials to our object. The first way is how we're going to apply two materials to the same object. So I'm going to click on our shell material, or our shell object, go over to the Modify tab, click Editable Poly, and then click Element. And that'll allow me to select the bottom and top separately. So I'm going to click on the top, and then with our red material selected, I'm going to click the button Assign Material to Selection, and click on that. And we have assigned the red material to the top of our Pokeball. I'm going to do the same with the bottom. So click on the white material, Assign Material to Selection. And we have successfully assigned the red material to the top and the white material to the bottom. Now there's another way to apply materials. If I go back to the Create tab to get out of Editable Poly mode, we can drag the noodle from these nodes directly onto the object. So if I drag this noodle into our button, we have applied the white material to our button. And if I drag the black material to the inner sphere, I've applied the black material to the inner sphere. And now if I exit out of this and hit F4, we have our materials successfully added to our Pokeball. Now, if you look at this button, you'll see it looks kind of ugly and faceted, so click on it. And if we go over to the Modify tab, we can add a smooth modifier. So just start typing in smooth, hit enter, and then check this box called Auto Smooth, and that'll automatically smooth the model. So next thing is to add lights. Well, actually, the next thing is add a backdrop. So we're going to go to the Create tab. We're going to add a plane. I'm going to drag this plane out and set the Z value to -10, because that'll give us the exact height we need to touch the bottom of our Pokeball. And next, we're going to add a light by going up here to the Lights tab, clicking on it, and we are going to add a free light. If this box comes up, just click yes, and click somewhere in front of our Pokeball to add our light. Now, the first thing you'll notice is this is very, very bright. So go over to the Modify tab, and under Intensity, change Intensity to something a little more reasonable, like 50. And then we're going to drag this up. And first thing you might notice is that we have no shadow. So under Shadows, click On, and we are going to change Shadow Map to Mental Ray Shadow Map. Now, if we render this just how it is, if we hit Shift F to frame it up, and then hit Shift Q to render, you will see that the shadows are very, very blocky and ugly. In order to fix this, if we exit out of this, we have to go down and change Mental Ray Shadow Map to, we are going to change the map size to 4000, and we are going to change the samples to 100. And hit Shift Q. And what that is going to do is that's going to smooth out our shadows. Another thing we want to do is we want to go down here to Final Gather Bounces, and we are going to set this up to 4. This is going to allow light to bounce around our scene a little better and is going to give us a little bit more of a realistic look. So if we hit Render, we have successfully lit, shaded, and modeled a Pokeball in 3ds Max. If you enjoyed this tutorial, like and subscribe. If you have an idea for future tutorials, leave a comment down below, and I will see you next time.